Welcome to DXgov governance discussion for Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021. Starting first with the proposal roundup, the proposals on mainnet, which cost a lot of money to get there. There's lots of different worker proposals in there as we move to the top of the month here. As we were just discussing before the recording went on, these were very expensive proposals to get on into the queue and will be expensive ones to vote on. So of course the gas is reimbursed up to 90% by DXDAO, but this is a huge cost to DXDAO. So we're talking about exploring those. There are just a couple of the proposals to highlight. There's, as I said, some worker proposals, and then there's the two different member balancer proposals. So each for 50 ETH. So one had sent 63,000 DAI and attached the transaction, Etherscan transaction in there, and then was requesting a 50 ETH. And the other one sent it in USDC and attached the transaction, and that one's requesting 50.5 ETH. And so actually a couple of the worker proposals are actually requesting in DAI there. So we're already seeing some usage in there. And then there is the DXDAO Discord launch initiative that Keenan has been working on. So this is just a DXD will be a DX reward to reward community members for contributing and building the Discord there. There's a couple pending boosting proposals. A couple that are interesting is there is the fund the swapper relay with DAI. So this is a testing out the swapper relayer, and so you actually first have to fund the relayer from the funding and voting power scheme, and then the multi-call scheme actually can use that. So this is the first, I believe, funding of the swapper relay with 5,000 DAI. And then there is another treasury authorization diversification proposal that will exchange 100 ETH for DAI till the multi-sig. This one is also interesting and great because it has the first verification for the multi-sig addresses in the proposal there. So a lot of proposals. I don't think anything too contentious. Oh, and there's also a join the radical.xyz CEDAR program signal proposal, which will be a very expensive signal proposal for that. But any thoughts or comments on the proposals there?
Just to be clear, that the proposals are expensive, not because of anything to do with the proposals themselves, but just because of the gas costs and the general costs of using Alchemy.
And part of that is actually just because the price of Ethereum has gone up too.
The price of ETH going up and the GUI being high. And some rep holders have their rep in Gnosis safes, which don't let you set the gas costs. So yeah, I spent $210 to make a proposal yesterday, and it is painful to watch.
Cool. And then I don't think we've seen a proposal yet, but I guess there will be a proposal for Omen on XDAI, and that'll come through maybe today or tomorrow.
I hope.
Good. Cool.
Yeah. Sorry, one more point on the swapper liquidity proposal. That is funding 5,000 DAI, and then the multi-call proposal to actually kick off the deposit is also sending 5 ETH. So the way that works is, the relayer will check the price of the ETH DAI pair on Uniswap, through public functions that are incentivized, that gets called, and then it will make a deposit into Swapper using the 5,000 DAI into ETH, and it's going to do it at the current prices. So there's going to be some leftover of one of those tokens, depending on the price. It's looking like there'll be some leftover ETH, and then that stays in the relayer and can get pulled back into the treasury again by the public function, which is, I don't know if that one's incentivized, but yeah, the 8 public functions. And I do believe the intent is to put a lot more than 5,000 DAI into Swapper, but this is our first proposal, so this is sort of the test run, so to speak.
But we will be using the multi-call scheme to fund Swapper, or can that come from the multi-sig?
Yeah, there was a little bit. There was a right now you have to send the ETH through the multi-call scheme, but the goal is actually to make it so that only funding comes from the funding and voting power. So there will probably be a newer version of the plugin, which will change that so that it's not ETH from the multi-call scheme. But for now, it's Ether from the multi-call scheme and tokens from the funding and voting power. In the future, it'll be completely separate once there's a replacement for that scheme. But yeah. That wasn't there is a little bit of a mix up there, but that's where we're going.
Cool. And as I said, we were talking before the call about ways to move a lot of these proposals to XDAI, and I just think that'll be a process we'll have to outline. And yeah, I think we can work on that ASAP to figure out how we can do this and push as many proposals there for worker payments as possible. Obviously, a lot of things will have to remain on mainnet, the things that control Swapper and Omen and ENS. Yeah. Cool. Next up, the contributor guidelines that we've been iterating on in the last couple of weeks. I actually think this is a great opportunity for to use XDAI for Signal proposal. So there were a couple things added, I think, this week on the clarifications on like rep awards happening after the complete of the first proposal. And so, Pulp, I don't know if there's anything else you're looking for Signal, or what do we need to do to maybe push these through to another through an XDAI vote to ratify them?
Yeah, I think that was just the main holdup. Is we had some other additions, Chris, that you pointed out to me via Keybase regarding when to claim your rep, which is in the second payment for your worker period. So that would be for most of us 2 months of rep requested in the second worker payment. And then I can clarify one other thing, and I think this is what we said, is that for your trial period, you're not gaining any rep, right? That's what we're sticking to for that 2 week. It's a quick 2 week trial period. Is that right? Or should we say some sort of rep distribution for that as well?
The way I did it was, if that trial person succeeds, the first month he gets rep, but slashed to that percentage. But there might be, like me and John talked a little bit about this. Like we want to give out rep to contributors, but if someone fails trial period, maybe that's not the right person to get rep.
Yeah, definitely. I think I can clarify that a little bit, but like I even have in there, like, if we have issues with people not acting in good faith, like they say they've completed work, but they really haven't, or they completed it so poorly as to just say, oh, I completed work in order to gain, financial gain or rep or something like that. Obviously, the squad guide or any other person that's had contact with that contributor can then say, this isn't quality work. We're not going to pay you for this. Sorry. So I guess the question is then for successful trial period workers who then move on to their full 2 month stints. They're doing that first proposal on XDAI or Alchemy, where it's 2.5 months. We want to give them maybe what would be like a pro rata of, we're doing 50% pay for those first 2 weeks. So we could do the exact same thing with the rep, which would be, I'm not going to do the math that quickly in my head, but I would assume it's something like 0.4, something like that.
0.04.
Yeah. So thank you, John. So yeah, something like that for the 2 week period. We can do that, and I can just put it in there. I doubt we will get any pushback about that. I think it's just a matter of clarification. But if it seems everyone else was pretty fine with the 80% prorated pay for the trial period, so we could probably just go ahead and do a proposal on XDI. Chris and I were kind of saying, though, there is the factor of like this being kind of an ongoing improvement thing, but at least if we do have the community finalize it, it'll be just good for the document book and the website and stuff like that. As something to like say, hey, this is kind of where we're at with the, if you want to, onboard.
And I think we should get in the habit of like updating it every quarter or something, and like that goes. And if it's on XDI, like I'm not as worried about passing a signal proposal. So I feel like this is we want to have this ongoing living document, but just periodically getting some signal.
Yeah, and like luckily I've had quite a few people just kind of hop on and like look at it and make a suggestion. I don't even know who sometimes, which is perfectly great. And if something like really obvious that we should need to address sooner rather than later comes up, we talk about it and just do it like that. So people can always just add notes to. Sky mentioned this though. I think we will want to do like an IPFS doc, not just have Google Docs once it's ratified, and then we'll also have it on the doc book and stuff like that as well.
And I think it's important not to give people rep upfront in their very first proposal, just to make sure that they are proving themselves as like a legitimate actor, not a scammer, not an attacker. And that's because like rep gives you quite a bit of privileges in the system, especially with holographic consensus, right? Like it basically only takes one rep holder to pass a proposal in theory. So I think from a securities perspective, it's important to be vetting new rep holders to at least some.
Yeah. So John, that's a good point, and I understand the security issue there. It's a little bit against like anyone anonymously come do a bounty and like you can earn like 0.1% rep, which on mainnet maybe they don't want that right now, but like we do have like a general goal to like get small amounts of rep out to like lots of more people, and they're not always vetted. That's the thing. So that's like already a risk we have,
Right. I guess what I'm suggesting isn't so much that we don't have like rep for smaller things, but that they do the small thing before they get the rep. That's like, I think, the minimum bar, right? Like we could maybe even think about making it a little harder for some things, but yeah, all I'm saying is like people shouldn't be able to come pretend to be a worker and get rep while actually doing nothing. That would be bad.
Yeah, I think it's like a standard that we kind of want to have, and that makes sense. It also though just of course brings up like the security that we want to make sure that we're monitoring and checking proposals as much as possible, because that is a possibility.
Yes, there's like a whole monitoring effort, and that's a whole other discussion we could talk about more another time. Yeah.
One thing, sorry, just thinking about this, that does mean, as a worker, you have to wait 2.5 months to vote on anything, even though you've gotten your first, think about it. Like basically we're saying, you did your trial period. If you want to get your first payment, you put your 2.5 month request in, and you can do 50% of your first payment. I don't know. It does seem a little like, don't we want more, everyone to vote, and at least you make it past that trial period and you're now going to get paid. It is kind of like, why not get your first month's rep? You're not a bad, we think you're not a bad actor. Maybe it turns out you are, and we are monitoring proposals and we are going to vote against you if you are a bad actor. It turns out like you have this big, I don't know, show you're putting on or something, but I don't know, that's a long time, right? Especially like in the DeFi world.
Well, the other thing too, which I like just kind of neglected to mention, is that you do get rep for passing a proposal just itself, right? So if you're doing a proposal anyways, I guess there's no harm if it's a funding proposal that you get rep for. There's no harm in like there's no additional harm in putting the rep in that. Again, I would like to not see people having rep like without doing something to prove it. We could talk more about this, but yeah, there's.
Definitely. But I'm just thinking about the logistics now. It just dawned on me that, that is what the 2-week trial period is, basically, is we're saying, hey,
right.
We're keeping it close. We're hand-holding you. We're making sure you're not a liar or cheat. And then we're like, okay, we're going to pay you now. So
do we say that is the 2-week trial period like a retrospective proposal? Like they do the work and then make the proposal, get paid on it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's great. I think that's good.
So basically, I think the way we have it, just there's a you basically have the 2-week trial. It's like almost like a DAO talk post. There's nothing on chain about it. And then at the conclusion of the 2-week, when we're like good to go, then there would be the first month proposal. Right?
You get paid, you get the wrap.
You get paid, right? And that would only happen after the 2-week trial period was like approved.
Yeah, and that's like only 50%, like how most people do it. I know others who've been around longer do it differently, but at least for most new people, that's how we're doing it. Okay, so cool. Yeah, so XDAI proposal will happen. Is everyone okay then with, letting people get their, first month rep during their first, worker request, and then the second month rep during their, worker payout request? That no one has a huge problem with that. It's absence if they pass the trial period. Okay, awesome. Thanks.
I mean, as long as people can still get rep from doing a proposal and getting it through, I think that's no problem. But if we had, if you didn't get rep from doing proposals, maybe we should have done it differently. But like if we're gonna protect us from that, we might as well protect it from the creation proposal reward.
Yeah, that's why the barrier to entry or the obstacle is at the proposal creation, right? And I think we need to have that to be where we're evaluating things.
Okay, sorry, I just want to make sure. So that means that we're okay with requesting 1 month of worker rep in the first pay request because they've done the trial period. Because again, like we have, even just logistically, if, someone's doing like Omen or whatever, and we want someone to vote on a market validation issue or something like that, we probably want that person to participate, right? And like not be barred from participating for a whole month. So things like that. If we think they're a good actor, that's
I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
All right, great.
Cool, and that'll be an awesome XDAI way to feature XDAI too. Kind of start getting familiar with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. And then next, just wanted to give or get a little bit of update on the multi-call scheme as it relates to the bonding curve. So we had the signal proposal pass about a little over a month ago on halting the bonding curve, and then the multi-call scheme had just been installed, I think just last week. And so, John, I think there was a little hiccup in the ability to control the bonding curve.
UI. Yeah. There's a UI issue which we need to address before making the proposal. And this is because the multi-call scheme in the UI, it looks at the white list of contracts that it can interact with, and then it pulls up the functions for those contracts, right? And so that works just fine for the relayers and everything else, really. But the bonding curve contract is actually, it follows a proxy pattern where the bonding curve contract itself is actually the proxy, and there's a separate implementation contract for the logic. And so right now, Alchemy in the UI is actually not pulling in the ABI, like the functions that are on the implementation contract. So you actually can't call the right function to make the pause. We could do the proposal outside of Alchemy, like using, like doing it directly to the blockchain. But we discussed this in the dev call yesterday and decided it would be better to just like get the UI fixed first and make sure it displays fine in the UI and like proceed through the UI. So hopefully, I think Oren is working on this already. So hopefully we will have that up and running soon and then be able to make the proposal with the curve.
Cool. Awesome. And then wanted to devote maybe the rest of the meeting, we'll see how long, to the Governance 2.0 signal proposal. So this is the Governance 2.0 working group has been working the last couple months on trying to come up with a long-term solution on how to develop a new governance system that sustainably intertwines REP and DXD. So I think we've hopefully landed on the structure of a solution, and We just a couple more things I think we need to discuss in terms of how to tweak it to make sure that this is this works for everybody. So I just wanted to share my screen for a little bit to go over quickly the actual proposal, and then a couple things that I think we need to discuss before moving forward. So, or no. Awesome. So this is what I presented last week at the Governance 2.0 meeting, and this is a version of this that's in the proposal the thread on DAO Talk. So there's 3 items that are in the Gov 2.0 solution. One is a new voting power equation that includes both rep and DXD. 2 is good governance incentives to encourage governance activity in terms of voting. And then 3 is a migration process to a new system. The voting power equation is by far the most important part of this, because that is really what adjusts the power structure of DXDAO. So of course, right now, voting power in DXDAO is determined completely by how much reputation an Ethereum address holds. So when we submit proposals, they pass or fail based purely upon how much rep is on the for and how much rep is on the against. And so what we're proposing here is to create a new equation that determines a voting power that combines rep and DXD. To do this, we want to have some stipulations for the DXD and rep in order to determine those. So these are the inputs we have in this DXD staked, and this would be up to DXDAO governance to define exactly what staked DXD is. At the minimum, it would be a governance staking contract, similar to what you see in YFI, but this also could include being LPs in DXDAO products. And then we introduced this idea of future months committed, which is a forward-looking commitment to DXDAO. So those that are not just DXD holders, but also willing to commit their DXD in the future, that we want to reward that. And then reputation held. And then also we are introducing a reputation decay function so that we don't have reputation that is just maintains influence over the long term. So the way that we do this quickly is we come up with this idea of DXD influence, which takes into account those factors, and then rep influence, which takes into account rep deflay. We normalize them both, and then we determine weights and combine them. So calculating DXD influence. So here, have this equation here, which is basically the amount of DXD stake times future months divided by 6 raised to 0.75. And so that's an equation where the 0.75, I'm calling B in this scenario, that would be adjustable by governance. And that's just a way of either increasing the effect of long-term effectors or decreasing those. And the 6 here is basically like a Schelling point for what we would say is like the average future commitment to staking. So in this case, if you stake for 6 months, your DXD influence your multiplier would be a 1. But if you staked at 4 months, for 4 years, so it'd be much longer than that, you would get a higher multiplier. So your DXD influence would grow the longer you were willing to commit your DXD. And then for rep influence, the decay function we have here is 1 minus your last rep issuance divided by 24 raised to D, and D is some power here. If it's greater than 1, then that gives us slower decay in the first year of inactivity and faster in the second year. And then 24 months again is, I guess, kind of like a Schelling point for if someone has been inactive for 24 months, then their rep influence should decline, because we don't want people just maintaining influence and power over the system because they had a large amount of rep at some point. We only want to be giving rep influence to those that are actively contributing to DXDAO. And then, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, and then step 2, we just have to normalize the rep influence and DXD scores. And then step 3, we combine these rep influence and a DXD influence. So this would be, you have rep influence and DXD influence, and how do we combine them into a single number for voting power? And I want to talk about these specific numbers in a second, but just the idea is having some way of combining them into a single number by weighting them appropriately. And so that's the voting power equation. And then there's good governance incentives. And then for good governance incentives, there's actually kind of 3 different things we agreed on to promote. One is the idea of distributing some either DXD or revenue to DXD that's staked in the governance staking contract or in LPing in DXDAO products. So this would be similar to what YFI does and having rewarding those that are participating in governance. 2 is what a retroactive governance bonus. So the governance bonus would be a backwards looking way of rewarding positive proposals and people that are voting for those proposals. So that's something we would want to introduce. And then the 3rd is selected incentivized representatives. So this would be finding DXDAO governors or voters outside of full-time workers that are basically, it's their job to monitor and vote on proposals, and at the end their record would then be viewed later, and they would be able to either be voted in for more time or voted out by DXDAO governance. And the idea being here that we need someone, especially the way that holographic consensus works, that we need someone to be able to monitor the system almost at all times, and not just have the existing system, which is, people are doing it basically for altruistic reasons. And then the migration process to a new system. And so here, this is another thing I want to talk about today. But in the current system, we can see that rep holders right now, of course, have all the power. So that means they control, I think it's now $35 million treasury, and also the 100K DXD pre-mint. But in this new system, we would, of course, that would be a joint system controlled both by rep holders and DXD holders. So we want to figure out a way to get to the new system. And so here we have 2 components, basically allocating a portion of the pre-mint DXD to rep holders under a certain under a 3 or 4 year vesting component. And then second is inflating rep and distributing it to certain DXD holders. And these would be, we have identified here, addresses that bought DXD from the curve and also current DXD holders. So the idea here being that in the new governance system, you need to have both rep and DXD. So we need to figure out a way to give rep to current DXD holders and DXD to current rep holders as a way of migrating to the new system. So that's brief overview of the system, and then just a couple things I want to mention to kind of kick off the discussion here. So one, this is a signal proposal. So this signal proposal is, it's not executable code, but this would be something that we would take as a and then build a new governance system off of this. So there may be some flexibility in terms of what the terminology is or the text is, but we want to have this text be as tight as possible so that there's not open for interpretation for other things. Some potential items to discuss. I think the first one is the voting power breakdown. So for the voting power breakdown, this is once we've calculated DXD influence and rep influence, what weight should they have on proposals, or what voting power should they have? After discussing with people, I think we probably should just land on 50-50, right? So that would be DXD influence. The score from that would be normalized, and then rep influence, the score from that would be normalized, and then they would just have equal say in the total voting power equation. Second thing I'd like to discuss is the rep inflation to DXD holders. So this in the proposal that in the text in the thread there is 5% to split between those that bought from the curve and current DXD holders. I think we could also play with this a little bit because we may want to introduce some of the idea of the DXD guild to this. So if we're going to be giving some rep to a DXD guild in the next couple months, maybe that's a way of also inflating rep there. And then lastly is the 10K to the 10K of the DXD pre-mint to current rep holders, and how that fits into this equation there. So I know I talked a lot. Hopefully people have read through before, but just wanted to kind of give a quick overview of everything there. Yeah, and just open to comments, questions, concerns.
Yeah, it looks like DXD holders, or at least I think it was Corbello who mentioned that 10K DXD to rep holders is probably too much.
What's the argument for so I'm looking at his comment. Like, what's the argument?
A couple different ones. I think Cabela and then Pulp had it. So the idea being like, why, basically, what is the justification for the 10K, 10,000 DXD of the pre-mint going to current rep holders?
Right. And I thought we actually had a very quick, it was just a lot of information, I think, during the Gov 2.0 presentation, like a lot of very good information. And so when you even like gave some time, Chris, to say, hey, maybe people want to talk about this more, but everyone was like, no, we need to reward rep holders. It's part of part of it is to incentivize, maybe rep holders that have not been active anymore by having to claim the DXD. But also this is kind of like a compromise in getting DXD and rep on the same page. So there's definitely like I think a justification for some sort of DXD allocation. The one critique I saw that may have some weight that I don't know how we play out is how that the liquidation and lowering the price of DXD by doing the airdrop would affect our current price of DXD. I know other things are maybe, things change the price all the time. So how much we want to take that into consideration of 10,000 DXD versus a smaller amount. Good point, Nyla. Yeah, airdrop lock DXD. We could do that. The other thing is, what about just how it's distributed, right? So I actually quickly just wanted to look at how many addresses have how much rep, and what's our goal here. So I saw that we had about 246 rep holders who have somewhere between 0.0001% rep and 0.009, so less than 0.01%. So those are like completely inactive accounts. Like, what's a reasonable amount to give those accounts if we want to like incentivize them to, take the time to actually get the DXD? Like, what's even if we're distributing this, what even makes sense to give that account holder an amount? And then we can just put, for all of those accounts, we're gonna, we can kind of get to a number of like that. This is a good amount for that range, kind of like, a tax system. Like, we can kind of figure out what makes sense to, incentivize those folks versus the folks who've like done the boosting or gotten a rep boost recently, have 0.01% or maybe even 0.09 because there's been some inflation on their account. Those people, how much should the range of 0.0099 and to 1% get? Like, we can do like a kind of a breakdown of like what we think would be a good amount to give each kind of like group. That could be one way to like resolve this as far as like the breakdown.
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple very different ways to look at what you'd want to do with like the inactive or lower end. Like, one thought would be to say, hey, they're inactive, they're not participating, cut them out of the distribution because they haven't done anything to deserve it. They're not an active part, so why like inflate DXD for the inactive voters? The other way to look at it would be, this is an opportunity to like re-engage people or voters that maybe didn't see a good reason to participate, even though they were involved early on. So
I guess, but like, does any, like, to Pulp's point, if someone had some rep from like the initial distribution and they've never done anything with DXDAO, and all of a sudden they find out they could go get some DXD, like what amount of dollars worth of DXD, like one DXD, would they go find their old rep and like go claim and pay gas to get one DXD? Or
if one DXD is worth $10,000, then they would.
So like, how much dollars worth of DXD would like someone get out of bed for?
Yeah, and then that's part of it. And then you consider, if that's worth it, if we even consider that worth it, we multiply that by about, 240, 250 or something, right? And that's, we're starting to get to the range of the amounts of DXD we need to, incentivize that group. And then it's the other groups as far as more of a reward, what would make sense, Yeah,
I mean, another way we could do it is definitely have vested DXD for 3 years, and we actually include like a condition, which is like at the end of the 3 years, you need at least some amount of rep to actually get the DXD out. So it's basically like a signal for there is money if you want to contribute. Like, let's imagine we're actually just doing the vesting. We actually, like, there's a high chance that we just throw out money.
Yeah, did it mention that they should be vested in the single proposal?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should definitely. Like, I guess my question is like, how many years should we vest? But like, I think this should definitely be vested. I guess that is a little bit harder if we want to do the incentivized dormant rep holders, that they're incentivized by like a vested DXD in the future. But like, to me, I think this should all be vested.
100%. Like, I would just throw out at least 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so a question about, will the vested DXD be counted as the voting power DXD?
Before it's
that's a good
vested?
question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Every kind of decision opens a can of worms.
Right. Like, how do people feel about that? I just.
I think vested DXD might be a separate token, and claim under this token after 3 years, and vested DXD grant voting power as same as not vested DXD.
Yeah, but then people, like, if it's a separate token that's fungible, then people could essentially sell that. Yes, it is an IOU for DXD in the future, but it will have a secondary market.
It can be on Swapper and generate fees. Why not?
It's also a form of payday loan.
Yeah.
It could be non-transferable though, right?
Yeah, but Martin is like, Curve is transferable, even though they try to make it non-transferable.
To really make something non-transferable, you have to be willing to enforce the non-transferability, right? So like, I think what actually is the linchpin in rep being non-transferable is basically social consensus that if a transfer were noticed, we could slash that. The rep holders could slash that rep to 0. So if there's like a consensus amongst the DAO that people should not transfer their rep, because technically you can even transfer ownership of rep with, if it's owned in a smart contract, right? You could do it trustlessly. But if the DAO says it's non-transferable and then somebody were to do that, it's like the DAO could slash that rep, right? So you'd have to be willing to do that, I think, basically, in order to make it truly non-transferable.
It will be fun to see how vested vested DXD market will play. A lot of opportunities for truly believers in DXDAO opened if they can buy cheap vested DXD and support the price. It's an interesting game.
Maybe for the voting power, it would maybe not weigh the same as regular DXD.
Yes, I guess Martin's an interesting point about like rep decays, but like DXD influence does not. And I guess that's true. And so DXDAO would have to ensure that it's continually issuing rep in that case, because like if it for some reason stopped issuing rep, then eventually like rep influence would decline. But like it would only decline if it's maintained at 50%, right? It would still be 50% of the governance capability until it was it actually decayed completely. And actually, I think in the equation I was suggesting, I think it was like you have a minimum decay amount that's like 0.05 is the multiplier, so that you'd still maintain some influence. It would just be like very, very little.
So I think Keenan's asking, would we be able to slash voting power of staked DXD holders? So voting power, I don't think, the idea is that it wouldn't be slashable, right? The rep could still be slashed if there was some reason.
Well,
and that would affect voting power.
Didn't you include a range? Like there's a potential, if we find, some trend happening with like DXD holders roguely voting down proposals and basically impinging upon the DAO being able to carry out its day-to-day function as a as the products that we govern in our ecosystem, we could then redistribute the power as well, right? From not 50-50 if we feel that something's going on that's imbalanced.
Yeah, and that was originally why I think there is a lot of the breakdown of what the weight is a huge, very important. And so originally I had leaned more towards rep only because DXD holders, we actually don't know what it's like kind of to govern, and if there's some problems with that, how would those be addressed? So the idea I was thinking originally was that this would migrate to the 50-50 after there was some proving of the capabilities. Alternatively, I think if the 10K allocation was the vested DXD was used for governance, then you can imagine in that scenario where the current rep holders that we assume in this scenario that they have long-term interest of DXDAO involved and they have experience governing, that they would have a significant portion, or they would have real DXD influence from their vested DXD. So even though they would maintain, they would probably get most of their influence from the rep influence score, because if the vested DXD was included in the voting power equation, then they would maintain some ability to influence from the DXD influence side. And so maybe then they could adjust it there. But that's why I think these things are all tied together.
I think the main mechanism protecting against some kind of liquid token governance attack, whether it's a straight out attack or something more akin to corporate raiding or whatever it is, I think the main protection against that is having the requirement for both rep and DXD, right? So it's going to be harder to Sybil attack. You have to do something to kind of prove yourself just to get some kind of voting power. If you want to just buy DXD and hold it, all the power to those people or entities. But if you want to be a governor, that's a different story, and it's going to involve a little more effort. And
you're locking up the DXD. So you're not just holding the DXD, right? You would have to commit to a future, right. Your DXD influence would be based upon how your future commitment.
Yeah, and locking it up protects you against flash loans. But I mean, it's also probably worth noting that you can still do a loan over a certain period of time, right? So I mean, you can still just straight up buy something, but yeah. If 90%, so Sky Foss is asking, what if 90% of floating DXD is already owned by rep holders? And what are we even doing?
Well, the risk that we're talking about is an even lower risk, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is in general an underrated component of this whole thing. But that was basically the same thing I was talking about with the vested DXD. If that's included in governance, then that lowers the risk. And so I mean, there's when we're thinking about this, there's what is the situation right now and the distribution right now, and what are the risks of that? And then there's the system separate from this and long term and independent of the current distribution model. And yeah, I think that we want to be, I mean, we're more concerned on to minimize risk through our current situation.
Right. And I think just the spirit of with all of these different things that we put into place to kind of balance out the rep DXD stakeholder interests, we are doing this whole process to give DXD holders voting rights and have them participate in governance and, engage them with their DXD. So that's the main intention, right? And then everything else is kind of a security formation structure that we're just, assuring that the system and everything's going to still be able to move forward as we hope it will. So yeah, I think it's just a good statement for DXDAO to say, hey, it's 50-50. If we see something that shows that it shouldn't be 50-50, then the community will vote to change that. And we luckily have.
It's not too late.
Well, right. That's the thing is that's right. No, of course. That's the question. Do we have enough security mechanisms in place to make sure that it's not going to be some huge dramatic issue?
Yeah.
That's.
And the overlap helps because we don't know what it'll be in the future, but we know for now, there's probably some overlap. Yeah. And I think the 50-50 thing, I think it's exciting just to think about how organizations can assemble themselves and divide power, right? We have a pretty simple way of doing this now that is either nation states, one person, one vote. And we have the corporate structure, which is, completely capital based. So I think it's really exciting to come up with a new system that accounts for both of those in a way. So yeah, in a lot of ways, I do think DXDAO is pioneering a structure that could be used by other organizations.
Yeah, I Sky, your point 51-49. I was thinking that would make a lot of sense if we had guilds where it was rep holders and then we had the DXD holders. I think it would make complete sense to do a 51-49. But since it's an individual ETH address that basically has to hold both, it would just
right. That's a key point here, right? It's not separate groups. We're not talking about having DXD holders and rep holders as separate entities, each with 50%. It's voting power is a melding of DXD and rep with a 50-50 weight given to each side, and it's normalized. So, I mean, maybe even that's not entirely clear that's exactly 50. It depends how you look at it. But basically the voting power final calculation would give 50-50 on the weights. But the voters are actually both rep holders and DXD holders. So, I mean, my hope with this is that it kind of dispels this notion of, rep versus DXD, and that it's actually just DXDAO members, right, and governors. And
the other really important part of this, given that DXD is a mainnet token, rep right now is mainly on mainnet, and we're talking about maybe using other chains as well. this whole system is awesome, but if it's all on mainnet, it may not even, it doesn't, like in the current state of things, it doesn't work. So like the question is, if you then have like part of it on XDAI, like, but the people's DXD is on mainnet and the rep is on maybe XDAI, maybe mainnet, like it gets way more complicated, right? And until we have like one true home base for this new governance system, these formulas may not work if like the vesting DXD is on mainnet and the actual stuff is happening on XDAI or something. So that's another issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously scalability is a huge question, a huge problem. I think that can be like, that's sort of a separate issue, right? Like hopefully, I mean, they are related, but.
Yeah, like even if we had this system live today, which is an awesome system, and we'll see if it works, it wouldn't work on mainnet. So we wouldn't be able to test it, right?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Like right now, it's almost like we're just planning the policy, and then the actual execution of this whole thing is just a symptom of everything we've been discussing about governance and everything to do with XDAI and how we move over.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point too, that this is kind of like broad strokes, like the functional requirements, but the actual implementation, like anything, right? Like you're going to come up with questions, you're going to observe things. So like at like the more nuanced like implementation details will have to get figured out, as people work on it. I mean, hopefully staying as true as possible to like the kind of high level requirements here.
To take the country analogy, at least in the US, right? So you have a legislative branch that writes the laws, right? And then you have an executive branch that actually needs to execute the laws. But of course, they have to execute the laws. Like they have some freedom, but it has to be abide by what the actual laws are. And then you have like the court that decides whether or not the executive branch is like, is falling within the bounds of the legislation here. So I think here, like this is like the initial legislation, and then we would empower people to execute this. But then ultimately, like there still is going to need to be like a migration process that's like moving funds or like doing minting DXD, minting rep, or all of these things that are ultimately going to have to be put to a vote eventually.
And to address the comment from Cobello and Slim Delgado about the 10,000 being, I mean, they both kind of use some hyperbolic language like enormous and what did he say? Outrageously greedy. Now, like I would push back on that, because if you look at that, right, so 10,000 DXD represents about 1/15 of total supply, 10% of the pre-mint, or if you look at the circulating supply, it's 20% of the circulating supply. In this kind of outline here of governance 2.0, DXD is going from 0% control to 50% of the control in terms of the factor. And so it's 50% of the control is being exchanged essentially. If you want to look at it in terms of like economic terms here, it's like 50% of control is being exchanged for 20% of circulating supply, right? Which to me doesn't, if anything, that's a greedy on the DXD side, right? Because they're getting way more control than the inflation is being given up. So I would push back on that. I think another way to look at it is if you think about startups, right? So typically there's seed round, A round. Typically in an A round, the investors, the venture funds are getting 20%, 30% of the stock, right? So that DXgov is different. We have this unique, again, it's kind of hard to understand what is it really anyways with rep and DXD. But if you were to take an extreme example and say, just ignore like rep and just say DXD is simply shares, which it's not. But like if you were to like look at that, one way to kind of think of it is, well, 2/3 of it, 100,000 from the pre-mint, is actually in the hands of the rep holders, right? And the investors, the DXD buyers in the bonding curve, hold 1/3 of it, right? And if you look at it that way, again, this is a great deal for DXD because now they're going from 1/3 to 50% with only like a 20% increase in the circulating supply. I mean, in other words, like rep holders are going from controlling 100,000 DXD to 10,000 DXD. So again, like not greedy. I would push back on that strongly. So I'm curious what people think here.
Martin, is that you pushing back or just saying?
Just like a general pushback.
Pushing back on.
No,
on
it's not. I just agree with John. I agree with him that he should explain this. That's all.
The thing is, this is quite a bit to the future. Like this is obviously like we're signaling to this right now, but I mean things could change and this will be sort of altered. Like we are signaling for this right now, but until we can implement this will probably take a bit. And then, yeah, this whole layer 1, layer 2, where is this going to happen? Yeah, it's all very interesting.
Yeah, I think maybe we can just, it would be good to like add the comments just to hear what DXD holders have to say in that discussion that's going on. I do think that we, instead of looking about liquidity, like how it's going to affect lowering the price of DXD, like Elon was just saying, may change in the future. We have no idea like what this is going to be a while out, and we could kind of say that, that was a ballpark number, to be determined what the exact amount's going to be. And then I don't know how people felt about the suggestion of doing some sort of bracketing. Like maybe that's just up for further discussion, but like, are we really trying to incentivize debt accounts? Are we, not trying to incentivize those accounts? Are we more so just saying, hey, you're giving up your voting power, rep holders, of controlling DXD, so we want to reward you for doing that? Like, what's our incentives here for doing the airdrop, and kind of figure out if we want to do maybe like a tiered DXD drop based off of like how much rep you have?
Well, I think there are two different types that you've identified. I think they're Paul, because one is incentivize dormant rep holders, smaller rep holders to like participate again. And then separate from that is basically rep holders that control the treasury now, convince them to give up control. And those are like completely different motivations, right? Because these are people that are like are actually like very active in governance and have like been around since before DXD, the bonding curve, versus the ones that are like we're trying to get out of dormant. So I think it could be interesting to take different approaches to them. I guess to frame John's point a little bit more, right? So there was like a organization that was like controlled by rep holders, and then there was like a fundraising aspect, right? And that fundraising aspect took ETH in, and then like in return, those investors got DXD, and then they're also getting some like governance capabilities. And we have not introduced those governance capabilities, and that was not in the initial investment part. But maybe this like Gov 2.0 component of giving DXD, so governance rights is like tied to the initial investment phase if you're using like the Series A round or something there. So I just think there's a lot of things tied up in this, and I do think we need to like address these concerns in the forum just as they come up, because there's just different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the one thing though is people will have issues with if some accounts get like a crazy distribution from this, just because we do have, let's see, I mean, I mentioned it a little bit, like we have 12 addresses that have between 2 to 8.79% rep. And the way that distribution looks, if we're just basing it off of, how percentage of rep and how much you're going to get of that, of the pie, that might be a kind of crazy distribution there. And we might want to look at, in those cases, doing some sort of, putting that group and having that group break down a certain amount of DXD and have another group break down, because these are, essentially these addresses are characterized by, like you said, high participation, high contribution to DXDAO. You know, a lot of positives there, but maybe the way that that's broken down amongst those addresses is not like one of those addresses could be getting 10 times more than the next address, right? So maybe there's just something we can look at as far as more of just like the taxation system, like a tiered system for, you know, rewarding those particular rep addresses.
I would point out that there's already a constraint in place with the 4% max on the worker distribution. So the largest rep addresses have not been growing. Full disclosure, my company has 5% of rep, right? So I'm above the 4%, and yeah, would be one of the larger ones. I'm not the largest, but would be amongst the larger ones.
Yeah, I bet and hope that it will take a while to get this implemented, and until then we will see like proper inflation on the rep side. So like the goal is actually to make those 12 addresses smaller, way smaller.
And that's an interesting point to think about. That like this is like the rep holders, but it's not the rep holders right now, or like when would we